Testing. 1, 2, 3. Test, test. Check, check, check.
Can you be just a little bit louder?
Sure, I can be really loud.
Okay, do you hear yourself coming through there?
Yeah, does that sound all right?
Okay, just stop a little bit more. Just count 10 for me.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Okay.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Science Cafe. I'm the infomercial tonight. Hi, I'm Dr. Roxanne Millay-Bruni. Most people on campus know me as Rox. In addition to running the Science Cafes, I also do the Student Expo. Favor, if you have a phone, could you please grab it out? How many of you are on Twitter? Okay, I have a favor. Could you please check out Bobcats Discover? We launched our Twitter feed last week. The idea is that we're trying to push out fun events that have to do with research and creative activities. So go up to the ridges and look at the stars, or come to a science cafe. So if you like the feed, if you could promote it, we would be appreciative. All right? I'm going to turn the mic now over to Dr. David Ingram.
Good evening again, and welcome to the Science Cafe, sponsored by Sigma Xi, the Scientific Honor Society, and the Office of Vice President for Research. I'm David Ingram, the Vice President of the local chapter of Sigma Xi and the Chair of the Department of Physics and Astronomy. We are working toward live captioning of the videos for future events. In the meantime, we are uploading the video to YouTube, which will caption the video within 24 hours. Anyone who needs further assistance or access is encouraged to contact me. As usual, for those asking questions, there will be a T-shirt. Before I introduce this evening's Science Cafe, let me tell you about the next one, which will be in 2 weeks' time on October 16th with Professor Shiyong Wu from the Department of Chemistry and Biochemistry and the Edison Biotechnology Institute. He'll be discussing solar ultraviolet light, friend or foe. Today we welcome Rebekah Crawford. She is a visiting professor with the Department of Social and Public Health. She will introduce us to the prevalence and pitfalls of seeking emotional support through religious organizations. So, Rebekah.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Science Cafe. I'm really excited to be here. I can't believe it's October. It does not feel like October, but I do have faith that eventually it will be Halloween. So hopefully you're thinking about your costumes. I want to start off today with a story. It comes from my research. It takes place in good old Athens, Ohio. I was interviewing a pastor who lives and serves locally here about some of the times when he encounters psychological distress, and he told me a story that kind of blew my mind. He said one day he was at a dinner party, and he was just hanging out with his friends. It was a Friday night, and his cell phone rang, And he answered the phone, and it was another friend on the phone who said, I need you to come, and I need you to come right now. And he said, okay. He got in the car, and on the way, he's talking to his friend. He's like, what's up? What's going on? And the friend that he knew said, I have a friend here who's in a really bad place, and he's talking about harming himself, and I don't know what to do. So I called you because you're my pastor. And he's like, okay. So he shows up. He goes to meet this person that he doesn't know, a friend of a friend, and the story, thank heavens, ends well. He is able to talk him through his concerns and help him to negotiate his needs, and he ends up putting him in his car, driving him to Oblenus emergency room and helping him get admitted. And like quite literally, I think, saving this person's life. So when he told me this story, I was flabbergasted. He just shrugged his shoulders and said, no, it happens all the time. Like, it happens all the time. So this got me really interested in the amount of mental health care that is being provided in religious organizations. And so today I want to talk a little bit about, I think we're having some fun with the mic. I want to talk about a couple things. First, I want to talk about mental health needs generally in the United States and some of the barriers that people experience when they try and get health care for their mental health. Then we're going to talk about how often people actually go into a church or a synagogue or another religious organization and approach a religious leader to seek mental health. And then we're going to talk about some of the really great opportunities that exist in religious organizations for taking care of people's mental health. And then we're going to end with some of the blind spots or problems that people encounter when they're in this context. So you might guess that talking about mental health and religion together makes people maybe not quite so likely to like shout out questions or like share their experiences, which is okay. I can respect that. So my plan today is to use Top Hat to get your feedback and to get your impressions and have you share your experiences. So if you have your phones and you're feeling technological today and willing to participate with me, would you pull out your phones, and we're just going to get a sense real quick of the room before we move on. So you can use the join code 281703, or if you don't have the app, you can also, the next slide will have a specific phone number, and you can text your answer to the phone number. Okay, so my first question is, do you have any experience with a religious tradition? And these questions are based on the Pew Religious Trust's survey, 2015 landscape survey. So it's not a very comprehensive survey. Your group may not be up there, but this is what we got to work with. Are you unaffiliated? Were you raised secular? I always tell those people you got to sleep in and have cartoons on Sunday morning. That's okay. Are you from a non-Christian background? Catholic, mainline Protestant, evangelical, or do you identify as other? So we got about 20 seconds for you to dial in. God is watching you. Just kidding. Be honest. I'm teasing. If you can't make jokes about this, then what are we going to do, right? All right, 9 seconds. Last call. Let's see what we got. All right, from those who participated, we have some people who maybe went to Catholic school. We got some mainline Protestants, evangelicals, others, and unaffiliated. Okay. All right, so let's see how this group compares with America in 2015. It's kind of hard to see, but one thing I want to point out to you is this gray line right here. This shows that the number of people who are, spiritual but not religious is rising. It's going up. But that in general, America is still about 70% Christian. So a lot of my research is starting in that vein, because that's where I come from too, mostly. And if you look at the world writ large, you can see that Christians are still the largest group of believers, but that Muslims are growing the fastest. And here you can see unaffiliated, that gray line again, it is still going up a little bit, but when you look at how it shares the general population, it's going to decrease by 2050. So I use this just to argue that sometimes I think, especially in university settings, we think like religion is passé or everyone's secular or whatever. But studying religious experiences and understanding religious communities are still a really relevant thing to do and know. So my next question for you is even more fun. Do you know anyone who has ever experienced mental illness? So our choices for here are nope, not that I'm aware of, some depression or mood disorders, anxiety disorder, substance abuse addiction, bipolar, schizophrenia, or other. Do you know somebody who lives with a mental illness or has had an episode of psychological distress? All right. Looks like there's the number you can, I think each question has its own text prefix, so if you're calling in your answer, use the same phone number but a different text pretext, and then add the letter that you want to talk about. All right. Let's see what we got. Okay. So we have some experience with depression, anxiety, substance abuse, and schizophrenia. Wow, that's important. All right. So how does this compare to what's happening out there in mental health care in the U.S.? Let's talk about some of the things that we know about what's happening on the larger scale. So the first thing I want to say is that mental health is really, really, really treatable. The news is really good. So if you can get access to care, the good news is that you have a 65 to 80% chance of recovering from, say, depression, or a 70% chance of recovering from addiction. So it's not, the end. And it's worth finding treatment because mental illness is super, super prevalent. So 1 in 5 people in the U.S. will experience mental illness at some point in their life. And a really relevant thing to people in college is that 3/4 of mental health disorders evidence themselves by the time you're 24. So a lot of things that are happening and starting to come out when people are teenagers and young adults. So mental health is worth paying attention to because it also costs, it has its costs. So mental illness is co-occurring with addiction, it's co-occurring with homelessness and incarceration. So if we can help people who have mental illness, then we can help address a lot of social ills. We also know that it costs a lot of money. People who are mentally ill lose $193 billion in earnings every year in the United States. It's the first leading cause of disability in the U.S., and it's implicated in 90% of suicides. So it's treatable, but if you don't take care of it, it can have a really high cost. So it's worth looking into how can we help and what can we do. All right. People experience barriers when they need to go get help for their mental health. So this question asks you, if you needed to see a mental health professional tomorrow, what would most stand in your way? So say something happens and you need to talk to someone pronto. Is it insurance that you're worried about? Is it the cost that you're worried about? Are you embarrassed or worried about stigma? Do you have to wait a long time to see somebody? Are you worried about getting there? Are they maybe at home and you're here? Some people can't find care providers who get them, like who know about their culture or their issue or their background. And some people just really don't trust mental health providers or doctors. So what do you think? If you really needed to see somebody, what would be the barrier that was maybe most salient to you? Or maybe there's something else that I didn't think of. Let's see what people said. And thanks if you're answering, by the way. I appreciate that. You can also call out answers if you want, but usually people don't want. Okay, wow, stigma. Yeah, that's fair. Wait lists, big deal. Okay. Cost, yeah, we're students. Yep. Transportation, maybe we're far from home, or finding a care provider who understands. Wow. Yeah, so people experience some real barriers when they need help, and it's important that we figure out ways that we can address those barriers. So we experience barriers here, and we also have large-scale structural barriers that exist in the United States. So let's talk about those for just a sec. Parity is this idea that if we pay for it for physical illness, we should pay for it for mental illness. We should give people the same access to the same amount of care for both kinds of illness, and it's something that we don't really always have here. So here's a map of the U.S. that shows the darker states are ones that have really strong parity laws, so they're like really making sure that people are getting access to the same kinds of care. And then the lighter the state gets, the less access you'll have. So problems with parity mean that we have things like lower reimbursements if you go see a mental health care provider, or stricter medical necessity clauses. You've got to get a doctor who says you need help more, it's harder. And less behavioral health care providers or places, right? So in general, we have more need than we have, I think, people to meet it. Now, add on top of that, so we have some general structural barriers if you have some sort of minority identity. So we know that sexual and gender identity matters. People who are members of the LGBTQ community, have twice to three times more likely to attend. And folks who are transgender, 11% of them, I'll stop doing that. 11% of them say that they get to the clinic for mental health and they experience some kind of bias or discrimination that prevents them from accessing care. So already some big barriers, add to it special identity concerns, and you run into trouble. And this is the same too with communities of color. So communities of color have language barriers that are added to this. They have lower rates of health insurance in general, and there's racism and bias implicit in our care system that folks have to navigate when they're trying to get really good care. So we can see a gap here. That's right, what I'm trying to say is we have some need. It's important that people get care, and yet we have these areas where we need to figure out how to solve some problems. So all of this paints a really good picture as to why people end up going to see a religious leader for their mental health needs. There's a ton of reasons why religious leaders end up stepping up and filling that gap. So we're going to transition now and talk about what would make you more likely to talk to a religious leader if you experience psychological distress. Okay, pretend you're religious, even if you're not. Okay, you have something happen, you need really bad to talk to somebody. What would make you most likely to be like, that's the thing? That is the thing that really means that I will feel like I can talk to them or find them. Do you already have an existing relationship with this person? Like, were they at your baptism? I don't know why I'm doing that. Sorry, guys. Are they free? That's kind of a big deal. People go to see religious leaders like when they're planning to get married or whatever, so no one knows what you're seeing them for. They're around at the funeral, like you can talk to someone if you just lost someone. They share your views and beliefs, and sometimes they come to your house, and or you see them regularly. So let's see what people think. What are some of the things that help bridge those gaps? Oh, wow. Wow, existing relationships. Wow, that really is cool. And less stigma and culture. Cool. Okay, so all of these things are all reasons why people end up seeing, no, if it's me, why they end up going to their religious leader. All of these things are things that bring people in. We don't know? Okay. And here's some research that corroborates what your answers were. So when we asked people who would be your first choice to go and ask for help from, 40% of the people said my first pick would be my religious leader. And of the people who do go to see a religious leader for mental health care, 56% of them don't see anybody else. One of the best strengths about religious leaders is they often are dialed in to professional mental health care providers that they know and trust, and act as one of the largest referral systems in the United States. So they're a really great front door to getting people into professional care providers, but sometimes people just will only see them, and so more than half of the times they're it, like they're the ones. And another research study that I read said that religious leaders, you would kind of think maybe they're just doing the little stuff, like the lightweight stuff, but the severity and the types of cases that they're caring for are the same as professional mental health care providers. So, heavy lifting, doing a good job. How many people overall in the whole United States go to see a a religious leader? It's about a quarter of the people who seek care end up doing it in one of these informal religious contexts. And that's compared to 17% of the people who are seeing psychiatrists and 17% who are seeing medical doctors. So more people are going to be clergy member than medical care providers. All right. So we've talked about how prevalent it is. We know that it's happening a lot. And now we need to talk about some of the opportunities and really strong benefits that religious communities have when they want to meet and care for their mental health needs of their members. Has anybody here ever been up to the Ridges? I love that Rox just mentioned that. Yeah? Yeah? I always want to know this, but I won't ask. Have you been to the Ridges or inside the Ridges? That's always like, people are like, I don't know. I don't know. It's not safe, right? Right. Okay. So the Ridges was built. It's beautiful. I love reading the books about the Ridges, the ideals of care that inspired the way they built it and the beautiful grounds around it. But we discovered as a society, remarkably enough, that when you take people against their will out of families, away from their homes, and put them into an institution, it doesn't really lend itself super great to recovery, right? So in 2001, the World Health Organization released a global study that talked about what really does work best. How do people really recover best? And they found that informal, inclusive community care contexts are the most effective way to take care of people who need support for their mental health. Think about a church and how it sits in the middle maybe of a neighborhood and connects people to the schools and to the clinic and to government care and other community opportunities, the church starts to emerge as this really great nexus point for a lot of people where that kind of safety net can emerge, where we keep people connected to communities or to resources and really help get them the care that they need. So that ends up being one of the biggest strengths that come with, or biggest opportunities that religious communities have when meeting the needs of people. Okay. Oh, I'm going to skip that one. I already told you that. Okay, so if you were experiencing psychological distress, which aspect of community care would matter the most to you? Would you want strong social support? Do you like the holistic focus on mind, body, and spirit when we think about health, the whole person? Do you want to be connected to those community resources or services? Or do you think encouragement to be actively involved in your recovery is going to be the strongest strength in your mind? Each of these things are things that religious communities are known for doing well. And I want to know, which one do you think would mean the most to you? It's kind of hard to pick though, isn't it? I do know if you just even want to scratch the surface of this issue, just do some research about social support and what it means for health. Because it means everything. That's the short end. All right, what did we say? Oh, social support and active encouragement. Nice, I like that. You guys are all empowered and involved. Connection to community resources, and then the holistic focus. Good. So these are all strengths that religious communities have to offer. I think it's so exciting. So sorry about that noise, but it is keeping you awake with the caffeine, isn't it? I don't know what I'm doing, but technology hates me, so it's okay. All right, the other thing that I really love about the opportunities that come in this context is that we can reach people who often don't get reached. So I love to ride my bike. I just took up road biking. I have bruises to show for it. And we have beautiful roads here in Athens. As I'm riding through the roads, I almost always pass by a church, a little country community church out in rural Appalachia, right? Churches are also really important in some urban neighborhoods. They're the center of things in downtown places, often inhabited by people of lower socioeconomic status or communities of color. And then we also have people who they can't go see a professional mental health because it would implicate their jobs. So people in the military or policemen can't go see a therapist, which blew my mind. And they work really closely in the military with chaplains. And so they're really used to going to see a religious leader to get support for their emotional care in the first place. So all of these are just to say, look at how embedded they are and look at who they can reach and look at the great opportunities here in religious organizations. However, you might guess that there's also some threats and some problems and some blind spots that we encounter when we look for mental health support in religious organizations. And one of the brightest ones that comes to mind that makes everyone sort of cringe and makes your belly hurt is to think about the child sex abuse scandals that ruptured first from the Catholic Church, but are coming more and more and more and more as we uncover it in every religious tradition. I don't think anybody can say that we're safe and we don't need to look and be careful here. So this is a really tragic example of times where we cause psychological distress or we inflict trauma on people who otherwise would be healthy, right? So there's some really clear threats and blind spots, and I want to talk a little bit about those now. I think because we should all be informed, and also finding the problems are kind of the first step towards addressing them. So one area of particular interest to me is women's mental health. So women, for a variety of reasons, I think biologic, I think social, are more likely to express and experience problems with their mental health. We're timing out. Are we switching mics? All right, take a breather. We good? Check, check. 1, 2, 3. Hey, round of applause for audiovisual people. Yay! What would we do without you? Nobody knows the magic you know. Seriously. Thank you so much. I just really hope that wasn't my fault. I would be so happy if it wasn't, but it probably was, so. Okay, so women's health. Women are more likely to experience symptoms of emotional and psychological distress. The more, how do I say this carefully? The more religiosity is strongly integrated into a woman's daily life, the more likely she is to express depressive symptoms. Okay, that's a whole thing to unpack right there. We could talk for days about that. If you want to, I'd love to. Women, when they go in to see their religious leaders, who are most often male, are more likely to have their symptoms dismissed and more likely to be told not to take their medication. So, like, layers of trouble here. And then finally, not only that, but I've been talking about all these rich resources that churches have. Some churches that I interviewed, they give you money to help you pay for therapy if you can't afford it. I mean, like, they're so generous and they really care. But in order to get access to that stuff, you have to sit as a woman across the desk from a man and convince him that your needs are legitimate. And women have less social power, and there's a gender divide in communication, and that itself is a whole nother paper that we should write together or talk about. So women's mental health is a gap, I would say. Something that we can do better on, I hope. Another big issue, members of the LGBTQ community, who I have a soft spot in my heart for clearly, have an 8 times more high chance of committing suicide if they are born into a rejecting family. And when you take that research, it includes a church family. It includes a neighborhood and a community. So if we are evidencing, even accidentally rejecting behaviors to these vulnerable people who we love, we are actively increasing the chances that they will experience psychological distress to the point of harming their health. There is a wide spectrum of problems and solutions in religious communities. Some religious communities are openly inclusive. They go out of their way to have social justice agendas, and they fly flags, and they are super welcoming, and some groups have it deeply embedded in their very identity as a group that families mean only one thing, and that not everybody gets to participate. And that is a really rough gap that we have to do better on. Finally, sexual violence. Women experience sexual violence in religious communities. I think it's silly, but like the bias might be like, oh, religious people don't have sex, right? Only when they're making all their babies, right? But it's not the case. Sex is more silenced and more stigmatized in many religious communities, and when women experience sexual violence, they have less voice and less access to support within their religious community. And some religious communities that I've researched are very tight-knit. And tight-knit can be great until you need access outside of tight-knit. And if tight-knit is not meeting your needs, then you don't often have other resources to go to. I have encountered stories in my research of women who come, and especially some belief systems believe in confession. So there's already this encounter where women are sitting and talking about their sex life with a man, which is already, raising red. And in some religious communities that I've researched, narratives about consent and bodily autonomy are so silenced that women experience sexual violence and they don't even diagnose it as such in their mind. They go right to I sinned, right? And so when they're sitting across from their religious leader, sometimes they're saying, I sinned, and then they tell the story. And it's clear, if we're looking for consent and if we're looking for all the things that we should be looking for, it's clear, no, you didn't sin. You were assaulted, or you were raped, or whatever. And I had stories where even when women, so I have one story where a woman, that there was no doubt that she was raped. She was drugged. She had a blood test that showed the drugs in her blood, and her religious leader was starting the wheels turning of discipline and shame and public rejection for her promiscuity. So we have just such a huge misunderstanding and misdiagnosis of sexual violence that women, they get re-traumatized. They ask for help, and it makes things worse for them. So this is not the story to end on, but this is a huge area of potential growth. If we could connect with religious communities, if we could speak in ways that weren't threatening or condescending and bring them into community partnerships, we could have access to help so many people. We could do so much. We could talk to people who we normally don't reach. So, I have been in online forums where people are shouting at each other in all caps about whether or not being religious makes you more mentally healthy or less mentally healthy. Religious people are more mentally healthy. No, they're not. Blah, blah, blah. Fight. And my answer to that is it really depends. It depends on so many things. I listed a list of things that it depends on. It depends on the issue, the mental health issue you experience. It depends on which religious group you're a part of. It depends on what you believe about gender, sexuality, and families. It depends on how diverse and inclusive your religious leadership is. It depends on how much your belief system invests in these ideas about perfection and prosperity, that good people get rewarded with good things, right? And it depends on where you fit in the hierarchy of the religious organization, how much social power and access to privilege that you have. It depends on what your family taught you. It depends on how flexible you are. It depends. So, we know a lot about the big trends between religiosity and mental illness. And the next frontier is to ask about, well, what is the difference inside of these religious traditions or between these religious traditions? And I want to end by talking about myself a little bit, if you'll forgive that. Has anyone read this book, Tara Westover's Educated? Yes, no, maybe so. I was raised in the same religious community as Tara Westover, but I have a birth certificate. I was enrolled in school. I lived in suburbia. I did not work in a junkyard or get hurt. I can't stand that part. Oh my gosh. My experience within that exact same religious tradition was vastly different than hers. I experienced my own set of opportunities and troubles because of the way I was raised and because of what my family taught me and what I believed and the choices that I made. So I want to leave time for discussion and questions. I'm dying to know what you think and what you care about and what you feel about this topic. But I wanted to close first by saying that I think we're well served when we remember that non-secular ways of knowing and non-secular ways of forming community are still very relevant and very valid. So I'm intellectually invested in these questions, but also I live with my own mental health issues and my own set of beliefs. And so a lot of these questions for me have been just trying to own experience and to make sense of my life. But I do think that when we come together and when we pay attention to other people's experiences, especially if they're different than our own, that we have a lot better chance of creating healthy and supportive communities. So I really, really firmly believe that it's on us to take care of each other. Like, it's on us. And we need to, I believe, know what's going on with people and look out for people and be supportive of each other. And so I thank you for being here today. I thank you for your patience with the noise and for answering the questions. And I really hope that together we can all think about ways that we can be inclusive and supportive and aware. And that's the end.
An immediate question or a comment they'd like to?
T-shirts.
I'm sorry. There's one there. Rebecca, can you repeat the question for
Absolutely.
Because of the high number of people who do reach out to religious organizations, have you done or thought of doing research to find out what type of training are these ministers and the religious people getting on how to deal with people who are having mental health issues?
So her question is, what kind of training do religious leaders get, and what kind of support is there for these religious leaders? And I really appreciate that question because there's a lot of research that talks about the fatigue that religious leaders experience because they're providing this kind of support. So it takes time away from their families and their well-being, and like it comes at a cost, right? It's a real service that they're giving. So the training is really a spectrum. Like I've only even worked beginning in a variety of Christian traditions. And so maybe the most trained person, I interviewed a Lutheran in Germany who talked about a whole class in div school that is involved on pastoral care, and then a whole internship, kind of like student teaching, where they shadow another minister, or I think they were called ministers. I might be wrong. And then they had a support group where they got together and talked about their care efforts. So there's some people who get a ton of pastoral care training. On the other side are people who are lay leaders, who are volunteers, who get called, and I had one person tell me, I got called, I got handed a book, literally 15 minutes later, people were coming in and talking to me. And just the power of the position is enough that people are like, well, God is with him now, and I need help. And they just go in. So the good news is there's a lot of on-the-job progress. It takes about 2 years from what my research has shown until someone's really up to speed. And a lot of people go, some religious leaders are like full-on doubters that mental health isn't even a thing, and it takes about 18 months or 12 until they're like, nope, it's real. And then they start reaching out and they start cultivating connections with professional mental health care providers, and they start informing themselves, like they find their way, right? But a lot of people, especially here in Athens, told me, we want connection points. We want access to professional mental health care providers. We want a resource fair. We want to come together and talk to each other about this, and we want to leave. And I know NAMI is doing a FaithNet outreach, so they're already involved in trying to provide those kinds of things. But I know specifically, one final thought, sorry, in Athens, we have a high turnover rate, I think maybe because of just transient populations, grad students, stuff. So those religious leaders will make their connection of their person that they trust, and then that person will leave, and then they're, kind of back at square one. So, yeah.
I don't know about locally, but I know that a lot of places, the person that's most trained, that's a religious person, is a hospital chaplain.
Yes.
Have you found that out? I mean, they have to take a lot of courses. They have to
Yeah.
take a lot of internships. Is that
Yep.
generally true?
Yeah, hospital chaplains are great resources. They are highly trained. They also work in tandem, I think, with social workers a lot too, who are also really highly trained. Yeah, hospital chaplains are a great resource, but they're not in every hospital, and they aren't, like sometimes you're there and they're not on duty, right? You can't always get one. So, yeah.
You can ask.
Yes, they're a great resource. Yeah. Thanks. Go ahead.
On a student's basis, like you said, like cost is like a factor.
Yeah.
So why do like people still make that excuse, knowing that there's free services for seeing psychologists at Hudson?
That.
Like that Hudson's not promoting it well enough. Like, why is that actually still students still perceive the barriers of
Uh-huh.
cost, realizing that you can get free services?
Great question. Thanks so much.
Can you repeat the question?
Definitely. So if we have campus care centers that provide free psychological services, why don't people feel like they can access mental health support? And the answer is that from everything that I've read from a wide variety of universities, demand way outstrips the services available. So there's really long wait lists. So if you get triaged, and if if you're like urgent enough, you can get somebody that will see you, but usually they're like, we'll see you in 6 weeks. And sometimes you're like, but really, like right now is my crisis. I really need it now. So there are people here in Athens that talk about, so there's churches that are kind of close to campus, and they talk about students walking in off the streets and sitting down and being like, I need some help. And these people, these religious leaders are like, I never saw you before, and you'll never come to church here again, but I'm here for you. Let's talk, right? And that's beautiful. It's also kind of like a crapshoot, though, too, right? Like, if you're like really in crisis, you're not quite sure what you're going to get. You don't, anyways. But there's people that are there, so, yeah. And it's a problem at every university. Everyone wants more counselors, and it's expensive, and I don't know. We need to prioritize it more. That's my answer.
But with the young people being generally less religious, but
Uh-huh.
also more conscious of like mental health,
Yeah.
how are like churches like dealing with that? Is it more older people who are going, or is it younger people that are going?
That's a really great question. So this question is, younger people are less likely to be religious. Let me make sure I get this right. So who's going to go see the religious leaders? The people who are more likely to, so if you're going to see a religious leader, there's some things that make you more likely. If you're older, if you are more religious, if you are a person of color, if you have a lower socioeconomic status. So it's a lot of cultural stuff, right? So I don't know what students are doing. I think students are going, but I think if you're less religious, then you're just less likely to be moving in that circle. So I guess it's not a great answer, but it's consistent with your cultural trends, right? If you're in that group, then you'll be in that place probably. Thanks. Go ahead.
You talked about how the military and the police are not allowed to get some medical help, psychological help. But there's been such a span of suicides lately. 6 or 7
PTSD.
police officers in 1 week or 2 weeks. Are they changing their regulations? Are they making mental health more accessible to them? Is the attitude changing?
That's a great question. So her question is, so we have these rules about having a record with our mental health. If we have a job that requires responsibility or guns especially, but yet we still have so much need, right? And is this a barrier that's blocking people who need it? I think we're doing better about talking about PTSD. I think we're finally getting to the place where we can let men have feelings and have needs. You know, like, it's tragic. Men are human and they feel all the feels too, right? I think being able to talk about wounded soldiers is kind of letting everybody be able to start to talk about it a little bit more, but I think we have a long way to go. Yeah, with police officers, yeah. In this way, I think gender roles restrict and hurt everybody, and this is a really great example of how men are hurt by really strict gender roles, right? So cultural changes, I think, are good there too. Go ahead.
So like my particular like religious background like acknowledges like mental health and treatment, but it doesn't necessarily like accept the use of medication for treatment.
Okay.
So in like a more complicated situation like that, how would you like go about like what do you think can be done to make it more acceptable or okay to do so and not feel
Sure. That's a great question. Thank you so much. So her question is, different religious communities have different ideas about what kinds of therapeutic responses are acceptable. And in her case, maybe talk therapy is okay, but medication isn't. So this is a really sticky question because you want people to get access to help, and a lot of times religious leaders won't refer out to a professional care provider that they think will challenge this person's life view, right? So they won't. So it's up to the professional mental health care provider to be able to know enough about cultural competencies with this religion to be able to work respectfully within the belief and value system of the person. So my answer to that is partial, but I think it begins with something is better than nothing, and let's keep this person in our care context and work within what works for them, right? So, I mean, I think there are only a few cases where medication is like the only answer, right? So starting with what we can start with, I think, is the first step. But it's tricky. It's a really good question. Go ahead.
I guess my question kind of piggybacks off that one is, I know at least my religious background was like very much like Jesus alone.
Yeah.
And so you went to like your pastor with a sort of mental health issue.
Prayed
they
away.
would not refer you to a psychologist, or if they did, it was like a Christian psychologist
Yeah.
who would basically just also tell you to pray it away.
Yeah.
So like how in like the research that you've done, how prevalent is that, and how, I don't know, how sort of can people kind of get out of that sort of hyper-religious
Yeah.
kind of bubble?
Yeah. It's a really good question. Okay. So I'm just trying to even think. How am I going to even repeat your question? So people that don't believe in professional care refer to people who will back them up. Okay. So my research looks a lot at when the needs or the priorities of the organization compete with the needs or the priorities of the individual. So there's sometimes when an individual is like, I need support, and the thing that I need is not the thing that you normally want to do, right? And people get hurt when organizations support their own values over the needs of the individual. So I see evidence of it all over the place. right? So people who need medication in places where they don't believe in it. People who are having breaks with reality, and this is very not common, but it still does happen. Breaks with reality that are associated with demonic possession, that's a problem. People who have an LGBTQ identity and are being told, no, you don't. It can't be, right? Those people are hurt more than they're helped when they receive care in religious organizations. They're just hurt. So, I mean, for me, especially as a mom, my answer is you get the individual away and into another context. There are other people who will do the things that that individual needs, and as a mom, it's my job to love my kid more than I love, right? Whatever my community says I'm supposed to love, so it's a priorities game. But people who are really, really, really deep inside those very tight-knit communities often don't get the needs they need. They don't get their needs met. And that's like one of the things that keeps me up at night, worrying about that. Yeah, go ahead.
Is there any research on like how society works out with people like growing up with two different religious backgrounds versus one?
That's a great question. So I don't know. I haven't read any research of that
Can
about
you
that,
repeat
but
the question?
I will. Sorry. Okay, so if you come from two different religious backgrounds, does it make you more or less likely to be conflicted or have stress or have evidences of? My guess is it would make you less likely because you have built into your worldview this flexibility and this great understanding that different people see things different ways, right? And I would guess that if there was conflict, that would probably not be great for your mental health. But other than that, I would think being able to shift between like worldviews and understanding like that the universe gets constructed differently by different people would be super complicated, but it'd be kind of like speaking two languages when you come out. That's my guess. But take it for what it's worth. Last question.
So mine is, I actually have a comment and like another question if that's okay. So I know there was a question earlier about like the crisis services, in particular here, and I just wanted to let people know that if you or a friend is in crisis, CPS does have drop-in hours during the day. There's also a counselor in residence in the evening hours who is available, and there's also.
Okay, I want to say this with the microphone. Will you say it again? Drop-in hours when?
There's drop-in hours at CPS, which is Counseling and Psychological Services.
Is that at Hudson? CPS is at Hudson. Drop-in hours. Third floor.
Yes, there's drop-in hours during the day.
During the day.
Counselor in residence at the LLC in the evening.
LLC counselor in the evening. Thank you. I should know this, but I don't. I'm not a student and I don't research here. Go ahead.
And then there's also like a hotline that you can call that's local to consult with a counselor. And then there's also the National Suicide Prevention hotline that you can call.
Yeah. Local counselor hotline, suicide prevention hotline. Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, I was just curious about the kind of research that you do.
Thanks.
I was reading your bio, and you said that you call yourself a narrative researcher. I wanted to know what that is, and is it the same thing as a qualitative researcher? I'm not familiar with that term before, so I wanted to.
I'm so excited. Yeah, of course. I'll talk methodologies for sure. So the question is, what kind of research do I do? Methodologically, what's my epistemology? So in two minutes, okay. So much of this research that's been done has been done by psychologists or in psychology, and they do a lot of quantitative studies, so surveys and statistics, right? And that's what gives us this really big, broad picture, which is a lot of the stuff I've been talking about. But my questions are about specific individuals and their specific identities and how that switches and changes. Like, why is my experience different than Tara Westover's, right? Or why is it different than my husband's? How does gender and how does my personal background influence my experience in my larger community and other people's? So I am a qualitative scholar. I do a wide variety of qualitative questioning. I do this because it lets people tell me what I need to know and not put my ideas onto them, right? And not that that's what, like, but when I was writing these questions up here, right, I was like, they're gonna, like, I'm picking their choices, but somebody in that room is gonna have a smarter thing to say than the things I'm picking to put up on this screen. So that's my approach to research, that I'm like, open-ended questions, tell me your story. I wanna just know all the things I don't know already. And then I follow it from there, and I reason abductively up from, so when I hear enough people telling me the same stories, then I'm like, oh, there's a pattern here, and I can make some claims. So a narrative scholar is a kind of qualitative scholar that sees stories as important to identity individually, and also that we live a communal story when we create a community. And it's especially pertinent to religious communities, because religious communities live stories, like they read the Bible or they read, their religious texts, and then they pattern their own communal story off of those old stories. So for me, it's all just like, how do we interpret and understand ourselves as humans, and how do those ideas affect how we interact and behave? So I have just loved this. I'm so grateful you've been here. I'm grateful you at least pretended that you're interested in the things that I'm interested in. I really am happy to talk together with you, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Okay, thank you.